Hi everyone, and welcome to another workshop during the Risk Awareness Week 2020. As usual, don't forget the admin part. Ask questions, write comments underneath this video. You can find out more about our speakers by checking the details on the right side of the video. Talk to one another, talk to other participants, respond to their comments, have an interactive session. Use this opportunity to really share and learn something new. Take notes, take screenshots, share this on social media. Really help us raise risk awareness. Today I'm joined by two amazing speakers, Sam Savage and Shaun Doheney. So I'm so sorry. It's not a Russian sounding last name, so it's unfamiliar. It's unfamiliar sounds to my vocal cords. But I've known Sam and Shaun for quite a few years now, and we've met was it last year at the probability management conference, or was it even? I think it was even a year before that in San Jose. So that was an amazing session, and both Shaun and Sam spoke at the last year's Risk Awareness Week. So I'm very glad to be joined by them today. Over to you, Sam. What are we this workshop?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be presenting with Shaun. Shaun recently retired from the Marines. We did some work together, some training while he was there. And he's been such a great promoter of probability management that he is now our assistant director of training and certification. And after Shaun's presentation, we're going to discuss sort of the implications of that. We've had a couple of big healthcare companies asking for certification in probability management, and a lot of interest in this emerging field. So Shaun has been, by the way, sort of the tip of the spear in our military readiness applications. We had Connor McLemore on, I think, last week, and Shaun and Connor and I have worked closely on this stuff. So with that, Shaun, I'd like you to take it away.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Sam, and thank you, Alex, for the introduction. And I'll forgive you. It's an Irish name. You have to say it with a smile. Doheney. And it really has been a pleasure working with Sam for the last several years, actually, on all kinds of different applications, from readiness to what we're going to talk about today, cybersecurity investment decisions, and how we can leverage interactive Monte-Carlo simulation to make better informed decisions. So let me kick off by first for our audience, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're joining us today. And before I do get started, I just want to thank Alex and the Risk Academy for hosting this event. These are obviously unprecedented times that we're facing, that call for all of us to come together and collaborate to solve the monumental challenges ahead of us. So I obviously want to thank my co-author, Dr. Sam Savage, for all the support and the assistance to make this presentation happen. And I want to thank each of you for choosing to join us today. This is very exciting. So please connect with us on LinkedIn, take down our email addresses. Let's continue the conversation after the presentation. We definitely welcome your feedback. And as Alex mentioned, put your questions in chat. We're going to be, although this is pre-recorded, we're going to be monitoring live as best we can to make sure that we're answering those questions, and would love to continue the conversation. So the work that I'm going to present today was done in collaboration with Dr. Savage through the 501c3 nonprofit probabilitymanagement.org. And that organization's devoted to transforming uncertainty into actionable insights. So there's so much uncertainty, so much risk, unknown things, but you actually have more data than you realize, and we can leverage that to make actionable insights. So for the sake of time, I'm going to forego the longer introductions since I encourage you to connect with us on LinkedIn and be happy to collaborate further. with anyone interested in the work that we'll be presenting today. Do want to dovetail on something that Dr. Savage mentioned, coming aboard as helping the nonprofit with training and certification programs. So I'm a certified analytics professional through Informs. That's the Institute for Operations Research and Management Sciences. I'm also an analytic capability evaluation coach. That program is also through Informs, and a project management institute certified project management professional. So with those certifications under my belt and those experiences, it just seemed like a perfect fit to help the nonprofit grow in those training and certification opportunities for the organization, so that we can collaborate with you to make those better decisions. I'm excited about it. So in this presentation, I'm going to demonstrate a cybersecurity risk management modeling framework. And I'm going to do so through the lens of a practicing private sector decision analyst who's trying to help decision makers visualize resource investment decisions through an analytically based and interactive risk assessment capability. And such a capability will help that decision maker to rapidly visualize aspects of their risk and then know which levers to pull in order to influence that risk decision. So the framework I'll demonstrate today, heavily influenced by Doug Hubbard's and Richard Sarenson's book, How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk. If you haven't read this book and you're interested in cybersecurity, this is a must-read book. Another must-read book is Dr. Savage's book, The Flaw of Averages, Why We Underestimate Risk in the Face of Uncertainty. I can't recommend it highly enough. It really has been a foundational work. And this is, as Dr. Savage, I believe, mentioned, so my background, a bachelor's in mathematics, a master's in operations research from Naval Postgraduate School. But it was after reading Dr. Savage's book that some of the how do we account for uncertainty in our modeling approach that really resonated with me. And I again, can't highlight or recommend that book highly enough. So a similar quantitative risk management framework, the framework that I'm going to present today, is actually used by NASA. Now, they aren't using the model that I'm going to present, but they're using the framework that I'm going to discuss in their risk management framework as well. And it shares a lot of the spirit of FAIR Institute's value at risk framework for cybersecurity. So for those who aren't familiar with FAIR, FAIR is a factor analysis of information risk. FAIR is another nonprofit professional organization dedicated to advancing the discipline of measuring and managing information risk in particular. And so finally, all of this comes together for those who are familiar with NIST, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology. NIST formally published that FAIR Institute's Value at Risk framework for cybersecurity as one of their information references to their cybersecurity framework. So all of this is tied together in the approach that I'm going to present today. So with the increasing number of people on the internet and the increasing number of uses per person for online resources, and the increasing vulnerabilities from vendors, clients, and connections, there's no shortage of examples highlighting the exponential growth of the global attack surface in the cyber domain. And as Doug Hubbard and Richard Sarenson note in their book, the size of the attack surface and the sheer volume of vulnerabilities, attacks, and compromises means that organizations must make tough choices. Not everything gets fixed, not everything gets stopped, and not everything gets recovered. So how do we then address this? So the former Secretary of the U.S. Navy, Ray Mabus, recently wrote, and I'll quote here, "In nearly 8 years as Secretary of the Navy, I faced a steep challenge on how to manage cyber threats at the pace of 8 million cyber threats, 8 million attempted intrusions a day in an organization of 900,000 people," end quote. So in his article, he advocated for an imperative to drive cyber investments towards specific outcomes. And I really need to foot stomp that portion to reinforce that how do we drive to specific outcomes, stating that, again, I quote, "When I was in the Pentagon, the Defense Department grew its cyber budget from $3 billion with a B to $5 billion, then to $7 billion in successive years, effectively buying cybersecurity by the pound." And again, without fully understanding the specific outcomes of those investments. So it's about more than spending. It's more than just about spending. My apologies. Today, more than ever, senior leaders and decision makers must be able to state their clear priorities and their outcomes. So how do organizations make cybersecurity decisions today? How do they currently prioritize their cybersecurity risks? And how do they decide what capabilities to invest in and apply their limited resources to? Well, unfortunately, the most common answer to these questions is by using this tool, the risk matrix. And some might argue that this, if you look at how I've organized this particular risk matrix, it's pretty good risk matrix. It's got well-defined likelihood scale. It's got clear impact criteria. But let's take a closer look at how this tool can be misleading. So suppose we identify two risks. Note that risk number 1 and risk number 2 are both plotted in the exact same cell. And so here we're talking about computer virus. You can read there, likelihood that it occurs 2%, impact would be 10 million. We've got another risk of a distributed denial of service attack, likelihood of 20%, impact of 100 million. They plot in the exact same boxes in our risk matrices. But if you take a closer look, risk 1, it gives us an expected loss of $200,000. For risk 2, we have an expected loss of $100 million, or excuse me, $20 million, so 20% times the 100 million gives us an expected loss of $20 million. So that expected loss for risk 2 is 100 times that of the expected loss for risk 1. But in this risk matrix, they're plotted in the exact same box. Let's look at two more risks. So in this case, you'll notice that our risk number 3, this intellectual property theft, likelihood of 60%, an impact of 2 million, it's considered a high risk. And here, risk 4 there, this encryption malware attack that we assessed, about a 50% likelihood of occurring and an impact of $9 million, that one is assessed to be a medium risk by this scale. But again, let's compare those expected losses of these two risks. For risk 3, that high risk, we have an expected loss of $1.2 million. And for risk 4, that medium risk, we have an expected loss of $4.5 million, twice that of risk number 3, but it's assessed to be the medium risk. So it's for reasons like this and others that Doug Hubbard, Richard Sarensen, Tony Cox, Dr. Sam Savage, many others in the risk analysis business describe risk matrices as worse than useless. And
well,
actually,
like Shaun,
yeah.
Right? Like for example, yeah, like what is a red risk plus a yellow risk? Is that an orange risk? I mean, it's just.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And matter of fact, I personally like how Doug Hubbard put it to me in a conversation. I think he said, calculations with risk rankings are comparable to orange times fish plus purple times birds equals Pee Wee Herman, for those of you who know who Pee Wee Herman is. So they're nonsensical when it's almost as though the illusion of communicating risk and quantifying it, but in reality, it's not.
Hey, I want to point something out here, though, Shaun.
Yeah.
Go back to the risk matrix.
Sure.
There's only one thing right about it. It has the axes of a probability distribution,
That's
right? And I forget in your work if we've done this yet, but you can impose a probabilistic measure over a risk matrix, which keeps people from going cold turkey. So, you know, you could sort of think of it as like an exceedance chart imposed over this. And so you can use it maybe as a stepping stone, but it definitely is only that.
And that's absolutely right, Sam. I'm so glad you brought that up. And we when we looked at this, we said, hey, well, this looks like a pretty well orchestrated risk matrix. For a risk matrix, it's still don't use them. However, when you start thinking about more carefully, what do I think the likelihood of this event happening is, and what do I think this the impact could be? That is a very helpful starting position for conversations that will lead you to what we're going to talk about next. So what is the solution then? Again, I like how Doug Hubbard and Richard Sorensen put it. If risk assessment itself is the weakness, then fixing that risk assessment is the most important patch that a cybersecurity professional can implement. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to dive too deeply into each of these, but we argue that there are 5 key features required to achieve that vision for that analytically based and integrated risk assessment capability. The approach needs to be an open standard that uses a common schema and data libraries for users to use and then add to. And this would allow cybersecurity risk analysts to quickly wrangle the data for model development. And don't get, when I start talking about models and you're not a modeler per se, don't worry, we're going to show you that this can actually be a relatively straightforward approach. My mantra, as Sam knows, is start small and reinforce success. We don't need to try and boil the entire ocean. We're going to start with those risks that we can clearly identify and start thinking through risk impact and likelihood measures to build a really relatively straightforward foundation for you. So those risk representations, they need to be additive, where analysts can roll up the risk results from different models and then combine them in other risk models. And I'll talk to that more in greater detail in just a moment. It needs to be auditable, and it needs to be platform agnostic. No more black boxes, no more proprietary software that locks you into a specific tool or a vendor. And yes, this is coming from a private sector contractor. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, it needs to be actionable. Decision makers at every level need the ability to rapidly visualize their cybersecurity risk and know which levers to pull to influence it. So our proposed solution is going to have all 5 key features, and we're going to put this into an interactive stochastic modeling framework that's going to provide analysts and decision makers with that interactive decision support to facilitate that risk discussion. And notice that I say discussion here. We're not trying to produce the gonculator that's going to provide the unquestionable answer. Rather, it's a framework that's going to allow for insightful conversations and decisions by providing traceable and defendable linkages as part of the risk analysis process. So where do we start? Well, actually, as Dr. Savage noted, that risk matrix was actually a good starting conversation. We need to identify the risks, and which includes estimating the probability or the likelihood of a risk event happening and the consequences of that risk, in this case, in dollars. And this concept really applies. Think through what is most important in a business environment. It's not in all cases, but in a lot, it's protecting that bottom line. And so as you think through this list of risks, they might have risks to schedule. They might have risk to dollars, budget, so cost, schedule, and performance, right? They might have risks to the overall performance of a program. But start with those risks and think through a common, what would happen if this risk happened from the same framework, whether it's schedule, and you want to talk about what's the impact to my schedule, or what's the impact to my dollar, my budget, what's the impact to a performance, stick with that same schema through your risk register. So in this case, you might not know precisely what the probability of an event occurring is, and you might not know precisely the range of possible costs associated with an attack, but you have more data than you think. Wherever possible, use actual, objective, quantifiable data. But if you don't have that, sit down with your organization's CIO, the Chief Information Officer, or your Chief Information Security Officer, or the subject matter experts in your field, in your business, that will get you moving in the right direction with well-calibrated estimates. And also, many of the risks your organization face are actually widely known and discussed online. So Dr. Google is a great place to start. We know what kinds of servers I don't know, but you know what kinds of servers you're using in your organization. You know the devices that your employees are using that are connecting to those servers. You know which programs and apps your employees are using, and you know the scripting languages associated with those apps. So the first step in the framework is just identify the risks. So in the case of the I Love You worm, attackers were exploiting VB scripts. And so if that's something that your organization is susceptible to, that's something you'd want to put in your risk register. And we have online, we understand what the potential risks are and the costs, and we can come up with reasonable estimates. Most of our organizations are using Microsoft Windows and are susceptible to the Zeus Trojan horse malware attack that compromised Bank of America, NASA, and even Amazon. So perhaps your organization is using PowerShell and it's susceptible to the fileless servers from the Coveter malware. Or maybe your organization's using an Oracle Fusion middleware and it's susceptible to the server ransomware. We know what our hardware and software infrastructure looks like, and we can, at least as a starting position, start with those known threats and get some reasonable estimates. So take inventory of your network, take inventory of your IT infrastructure, and along with the kinds of devices and applications your employees are using to connect to those servers and the data, internet's full of open source information about the threats that could impact the infrastructure and the lessons learned. So in both probabilities that are surrounding those events and the damages that were incurred by the risks. We don't have to start from scratch here. Learn from Bank of America, NASA, Amazon, Target, OPM, and so many other organizations. And then after you identify the risks to your network and generate your initial estimates, we can model the risk. Here we're using a simple Monte Carlo simulation based on those risk assessments over a period of time. So let's say 1 year. So first we roll those Monte Carlo dice to see if the attack occurs in that given year. The green here indicates the attack didn't occur, and the red indicates that the attack did occur. And so if the attack does occur, here we're my apologies, let me just make sure that it's clear that, as we're talking here, we're cycling through the trials of our Monte Carlo simulation for that year. And if the attack does occur, we roll our Monte Carlo dice again, and we determine what the associated cost was. So you see these blue spark lines. Those represent the distribution of the incurred costs across all trials. And here I'm running 10,000 trials for a specific risk, and the dollars shown are the costs that are incurred in that particular trial. So now that we've modeled the risk across all of those trials, we can assess the results based on our estimates. So in this case, we see that the average across all 10,000 trials is over $3 million. And we can see that the forecasted loss for each of those trials as we cycle through the trials here, we can see the forecasted loss where as we cycled through all 10,000 trials, that's where we get that blue histogram there across all 10,000 trials. So that represents the distribution of the total loss across all 10,000 trials. And now we have the results. Looking and we can answer questions like, what's the chance that the total loss is going to be greater than or equal to a particular dollar amount? And so here you can see that as I change the dollar amount, I can actually get the answer to exactly that question. So in this case, based on our estimates, we see there's a 23% chance that the total loss will be greater than $5 million. There's an 8% chance that that total loss is going to be greater than $7 million. And even a 2% chance of it being greater than $10 million. We can compare that with our organization's risk tolerance here. So we plot that in a chart, and you see this solid red line is what we're observing based on our risk estimates and our calculations, but maybe our organization isn't willing to accept that risk, and their risk tolerance here is represented by that dashed blue line. So remember, we're not going to prevent every attack, but we can consider the expected costs and think through what the organization might consider an acceptable risk. So in this example, the organization says, my inherent risk is too high, and it sets targets for acceptable risk tolerance levels shown in that table here, represented by the dashed blue line in the graph there.
Yeah, and Shaun, this was, I mean, you're showing a model that you built using the SIPMath tools, right? So this is the tools you can get free at probabilitymanagement.org, and the resulting model is just a native Excel model. So it isn't, you don't need special software to run it.
That's right. No more locking into black box proprietary software. This is sitting down and in Excel with a spreadsheet model, just with your subject matter experts, thinking through, what are the risks that are facing our organization right now. And yes, all of this was built in native Excel using the open source probability management, the SIPMath modeling tools. And the beauty of the tools, one of the beautiful things about the tools is an analyst can build a model like you're seeing here using those tools, but then share this with anyone and everyone, and they don't need the tools to switch the numbers here in the cells and play around with the model. There are other tools out on the market where you buy the tools, the analyst builds the model using the tools, and you still have to have those tools in order to use the model. That's not the case here. And so now you can share this with anyone who has Excel, for example, which last I checked, I think that's about 1.2 billion people. So let me see. Yep, I think I'm on this slide now. So now that you've identified the risks, you've modeled what the impact of those risks could be, what's the expected loss in a given period of time. Now you want to sit back down with those subject matter experts, and you can develop some mitigation strategies and estimate what the impact of each of those strategies might be on your portfolio. So here I'm just going to use 4 mitigation strategies. I want to keep it simple just for the sake of for illustrative purposes. So in this example, let's say the organization has a budget of $100,000, and they're considering these 4 things: an enhanced email protection suite, maybe upgrading their network to zero trust architecture, and it's got an associated cost with it, maybe upgrading to an advanced threat protection suite, and you can see the cost associated with that, and possibly implementing a cloud application security suite. Now, again, all of these things I'm throwing out here from a numbers perspective, from a likelihood perspective, they're all notional for illustrative purposes only, but I hope you're getting an idea of the strategy that you can use to do exactly this kind of work in your own organization. So each of these strategies has an associated cost, and we see in this simple example that the cost of purchasing all 4 of these strategies exceeds our budget of $100,000. Now, not by much, but it exceeds the budget. So, whoops, my apologies, I gotta lose my Oop, there you go. Sorry, losing my laser pointer there. So each of these strategies might impact each of these risks differently. And you can see how I've, with our subject matter experts, we've thought through, that first risk. Here was the original likelihood of it happening. Well, how's it going to change, either increase or decrease the risk? So here I'm going to say that applying these different mitigation strategies has this level of impact against each of these risks. So here's my starting position. I've got a 5% that it happens. If I actually use all 4 of these mitigation strategies at the end, it reduced the likelihood of it happening by a couple percentage points. So not a big deal for this risk, but now you start looking at some of these here. Oh, this risk can, by implementing this strategy, decreases significantly. And you can start getting a sense of those, answering those kinds of questions as you sit down with your subject matter experts, thinking through all the different interactions. So we rerun the model then, based on these updated probabilities that the event's going to occur. And now we see that the expected total loss after implementing all 4 of these strategies dropped from over $3.7 million to under $2.3 million. That's a 40% reduction. And I want to really highlight that point. We can provide our decision makers with quantitative estimates of risk reduction. So on a side note, if our decision maker was originally concerned about the fact that we were over budget by $59,000, we can highlight that the expected risk avoidance of implementing all of these mitigation strategies is over $1.5 million. So if that doesn't help you defend and justify that budget, I'm not sure what would. Of course, again, I have to highlight these numbers are all made up to simply demonstrate the framework, but the ability to provide decision makers with these types of quantitative metrics is precisely what the former Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mabus, was advocating for, fully understanding specific outcomes of cybersecurity investments. So let's say our decision makers got it, risk reduction or risk avoidance of $1.5 million, but your budget's your budget, and I'm going to stick with that $100,000 portfolio. Okay, so we can consider then different portfolio options to find that optimal portfolio that minimizes that expected loss while meeting our budgetary constraint. The problem here, and I don't want to go into the weeds too much from ops research perspective, but this is a mixed integer, nonlinear, non-convex problem. So this is a very hard problem. And as the number of risks increase and the number of mitigation strategies increase, the problem obviously gets exponentially harder to find an optimal solution. Even if this, even in this simple example of just 10 risks and 4 mitigation strategies, it really challenged the optimization software that we have at our fingertips. It's just built into Excel through their solver. So what's the solution here? Well, rather than relying on a solver, let's just plot all of the various portfolios with their associated costs against various metrics to visualize that efficient frontier. So in this simple example of 4 mitigation strategies, there are only 16 possible portfolios. And we can easily cycle through each of these 16 portfolios, seeing how each portfolio then impacts each of the risks that we've identified, and we can compare the cost of that portfolio against various metrics, such as the chance of exceeding a specific dollar limit, or a specified loss percentile, or expected total loss. You can see I have 3 different metrics that I'm plotting the total cost against in each of these cases. So here we see that in this case, portfolio 10, it's within our budget with the lowest expected loss and the lowest 99th percentile loss, and that's what I'm measuring here. And it's the lowest chance that the total loss will exceed that $4 million threshold.
Hey, Shaun.
But, yeah.
Let's stop at this diagram for a second.
Sure.
So, do you happen? Well, you know Tom Lucas out at Naval Postgraduate School.
I do.
Do you know Alex McCallum?
I don't.
So he's one of. So let me discuss what you've done here by trying a bunch of portfolios, right? And every
Yep.
portfolio is a dot.
That's right.
Right? So the question might be, what if we had, well, if you've got like, if you had 10 mitigations, then you'd have 2 to the 10th possible portfolios or 1,000 dots, right?
That's right.
And what if you had 100? Then you'd have 2 to the 100th dots, and that's more than the number of dots that Excel can display, right? That's like more than the stars. So what this group at the Naval Postgraduate School has done, it's called SEED,
Mm-hmm.
and Tom Lucas is one of the folks there. And you're not going to try all 10 to the 100th or 2 to the 100th dots, more than the number of stars in the universe. What you will do is like a very efficient shotgun approach, right? So it's ways to pick out like a shotgun, right? You don't want to choke the shotgun down. You want to have as wide a shotgun blast as you have. So you'd pick only a tiny fraction of the dots, but they would show you the shape of the space.
That's
right?
absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And so, I mean, fundamentally, the question is, does a simple approach with 16 dots, does it scale, right? That's the question we're asking. And yet the answer is absolutely. There are ways to see that this approach does scale. So using the open SIP math standard with those auditable SIP libraries from our Monte Carlo simulations, it makes it easy to plot thousands of portfolios to easily visualize that efficient frontier. And so this is just one example that I know you've used at Shell to visualize thousands of portfolios as you were determining an optimal venture strategy, I believe, right?
Right, and the idea is that if you look at a representative sample with your shotgun, that will take you to the efficient frontier, but then you can get off and walk the rest of the way, right? By hand. Well, what if we try this one? What if we try this one?
That's right.
That's exactly what they did. You don't have to represent every possible portfolio. You just give someone a good map of the territory and let them go exploring on their own.
That's right. And Dr. Parnell, another widely recognized decision scientist, has also used this approach in set-based design for system design, trait space exploration as well. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, the computational power required to plot the results of an auditable Monte Carlo simulation is far less than that's required to solve some mixed integer, nonlinear, non-convex optimization problem with thousands of decision variables, right? So they absolutely use data visualization techniques and plotting those much more efficient. And as you saw here, decision makers can, I know that this is some of your work. You can actually click on some of these dots and go, well, what's going on here in this region, or what's going on in this region? And you can actually, again, that interactive, get the decision maker involved in the interactive nature of these discussions to explore that. So, yep. So let me kind of, in conclusion, first, no more risk matrices. You can actually look at your risk through quantitative measures. So this quantitative risk analysis framework is just as applicable to cybersecurity professionals as it is to any other organization attempting to understand and visualize the uncertainty that's in their systems. So this approach cures the problems that are associated with those risk matrices, and it helps cybersecurity professionals truly assess their risk and prioritize their limited budgets as they decide which strategies are we going to pursue. Which strategies can we resource with the funds that we have? Start small, reinforce success, and grow your cybersecurity portfolio in a prioritized manner using these kinds of approaches. And lastly, this probability management and the tools, the open standard tools that we have at our disposal, we're available to help with these kinds of activities as well. And Sam, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about this Stanford course, that an introduction to probability management. And so just from my hat, before you can share some more of the information about that, we're looking at this as really that level 1 certification in probability management as a perfect means to get your foot in the door, to understand how you can build these kinds of models yourself in your own organization. So it's kind of a train the trainer approach here, and really highly recommend that you reach out to us, reach out to probability management, and take a look at this the Stanford edX course that really serves as the foundation for getting certified in this techniques. Any other thoughts along those lines, Sam?
No, thanks, Shaun. I do want to discuss a bit. If you let me share, I'll just show the screen for that Stanford course. But Shaun realized right away, I think, having used lots of analytical tools at the Naval Postgraduate School, within the Marines, that, oh, well, this is new. We're living in native Excel. And also, I think because of the interactive nature of these tools, it doesn't take a PhD to use them.
That's right.
Now, I have to say that when I was in high school, I got D's in 3 of my 4 years of high school English. I say, oh, I had a bad teacher. No, it was a randomized experiment. They were all different teachers. No, it was the student. And in particular, the beginning of my junior year, my English teacher called me and she said, well, you're currently flunking English. Perhaps by the second semester you could work your way up to a D. But the real problem was I was going to the University of Chicago Laboratory School, and she said, it's a college preparatory school, and you should be going to a technical school in Chicago. It was called Lane Tech. I could learn how to be an electrician or a plumber or whatever, right? And so this, by the way, because Shaun's studied a lot of decision analysis, you probably have as well, Alex. Here's a junior in high school, and I came up with this was my first big career decision. And it was, should I work my butt off to get a lousy D in English, or should I play my guitar to get music? It was an easy choice. But subsequently, I did flunk out of college, and I was an automobile mechanic. And I discovered that among automobile mechanics, there are some very smart ones and very dumb ones. Frankly, among Nobel Prize winners, I think there's some pretty smart ones and some pretty dumb ones. I really began to understand the normal distribution at that point. And what I learned as a mechanic has stayed with me through my life. And I view spreadsheets as sort of like mechanical devices. What I'm driving at is, I don't think you have to be a PhD to do probability management. I think you have to be an Excel user. And yet, Shaun and I sort of are trying to get our heads around, what do you need for various levels? And let me share the Stanford course. So the Stanford course, which is free through Stanford Online, an introduction to probability management. At this level, it's like, what does probability management smell like? You can learn kind of the basic concepts of dealing with uncertainty, and use the free tools at probability management to build some very simple models. Because you sort of have to understand the basic concept. Yeah, go ahead.
Just dovetailing off that is, I view Excel, well, one, it's a tool that 1.2 billion users have at their fingertips. And it really is a tool. I equate it to my Leatherman that I took with me everywhere I went in the Marine Corps. A phenomenal multi-purpose tool that is good in so many areas. Now, there might be some problems where you need some specialized tools to do some specialized work, but that Leatherman, that Gerber, that you can break open and everyone has at their fingertips. And now you can build in these interactive spreadsheet models that allow, I like, putting the decision maker in the driver's seat, or I know you like to use the analogy of the airplane, give them the controls and let them fly for a little bit so that you can earn trust of that decision maker in the decisions that they need to make, right? So it's a beautiful capability, simple and elegant, and very versatile.
But of course, we're not limited to Excel.
That's right.
And I find that when you need something more powerful in Excel, it's great to prototype it in Excel first to get your thoughts straight. But what Shaun and I are noodling around and are getting requests from other firms for is, what are the real levels of doing this? Because if you take the course, you're not going to be able to dive in and actually talk to a business owner and build a model to solve their problem, very likely. And to do that, you're not going to learn it from a book. And so we really need to develop an organized practicum, solve typical sets of problems that you would find in the real world, in cybersecurity, in resource allocation, in scheduling. And we're hoping to offer a certification at that level, and that's what Shaun and I and others are engaged in, is trying to determine, okay, you took the Stanford course and you want more, and your organization is relying on you to provide them dependable, defensible insight into their problems. How do we get you to that point?
That's right. And Sam, I'd like to dovetail on that as well, that we welcome the experience from the audience, the examples that you have at your fingertips. Share some of those insights and examples with us as you take the course, which you can take for free. Where are ways you would see things going next? If you can pay for the course and get a certificate from Stanford, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that we're going to drop a code, a promotion code in the chat here or on the site, where the students can get is it 10% off? Is that right? And
it's now cheap too. It's only like $89 to begin with. So
yeah. And so, as our audience here takes that course, they have vast experiences in the field. What are some of those examples that they're wrestling with how to model? I'd love to hear about those.
Yeah, and let me sort of describe what I see as the levels of probability management. So 25 years ago, I know I've even said this in one of the other discussions with you, Alex. I woke up one morning to realize that I was using light bulbs without knowing how to generate electricity, right? Yeah, because you have specialists in power plants doing it and distributing it over. And yet, with Monte Carlo simulation, you had to be your own expert to generate your own random numbers. So that was 25 years ago. And we're just getting to the point now where we can truly sort of mimic the electric power grid, only we're doing it for probability distributions. So one level of understanding electricity is, oh, there's a plug in the wall. Don't let your baby stick their fingers in there, but I can plug my lamp in and light my light bulb. I'm telling you, before Edison and Westinghouse, people didn't know that, and they had to be trained. I think the Stanford course goes a little beyond that level. But once we start having people generating libraries, and we are beginning to do this, and Alex, you and I must continue our discussion of exchange rates along these lines, and we're doing it with the Government Finance Officers Association. We're beginning to look at big defense contractors and libraries of distributions. Once we start having libraries of distributions, that first level That is, knowing where the plug is and how to keep your baby's fingers out of it, whoa, that works for a lot of people. And the next level is sort of how to generate the electricity. And that's a considerably higher level. But it still doesn't take a PhD. And this is what we're trying to structure as we see more and more people adopting the discipline. And so it's so exciting to be in kind of at the beginning of such a thing. And I'm so happy that Shaun is heading up this effort.
Well, thank you so much, Alex, for the opportunity to present today. And we'll see what questions we get in chat. And I look forward to continuing the conversation and the dialogue.
Thank you, guys. And everyone, please ask questions underneath this video. Thank you. And we'll see you in other workshops.
Bye-bye.